This budget presentation and Q&A is being recorded by NCM and it is being filmed. And it will be shown live on NCM. It'll be recorded, so we'll be able to get it out on YouTube and our various social media sites tomorrow. So any of the comments and the presentation will be viewable after this. I'm Tony Musico, General Manager for the town of Norwood, for anyone who may not know me. A couple of, ground rules as we go through. I do have a presentation that we're going to go through for everyone. We'll start with taking questions in the comments during the relevant section of the budget that as we go through different departments. If we end up getting a lot of questions and it would make more sense to hold till the end, I'll ask everyone to just hold the questions until the end, and then we'll start taking them in order so we can get through the presentation. I'll be able to answer most questions residents have, and most of our department heads are joining us this evening. There were a few that couldn't make it. Some of them are currently engaged in childcare, as we've heard. I'd ask everyone to keep their mics muted until we get to them, whether it's a question or an answer. Direct any questions you have in the chat to me, and we'll either I'll take care of them or relay them to the appropriate department head. As we go through the presentation, one other item, if you see any numbers in the presentation that may not match up directly to the budget book numbers are always the final numbers. That's actually what gets voted on. Sometimes the presentation is a matter of fitting things in from a spreadsheet into the presentation. So the budget book is the ultimate number. You can follow along in your budget book. I do have both my hard copy and my digital copy here as we go through. And if something does come to mind later on that you didn't get a chance to ask a question or you're not sure, you can always email us at managers@norwoodma.gov and we'll get the appropriate answer from the department. And we'll also be doing a session on Facebook Live after our regular weekly Facebook Live session tomorrow at 5 p.m. and another one Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Those will also be recorded and available on our website, assuming that there are new questions there. That won't be as much of a presentation, just a chance to ask any questions that folks would have. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. If everyone will bear with me for a moment as I bring up our presentation. All right, if anyone does have any issues in hearing us or with their audio or visual, just feel free to put that in the chat. So welcome everyone to the FY21 budget presentation. Before I go through this overview, I want everyone to just understand we sort of have a pre-COVID budget and a post-COVID budget, and that really relates to the world we built the budget in, and then some changes we've made to try to react to the actual world that we're living in post-COVID. So keep that in mind as we go through some of the explanations of what we're doing to adjust to COVID will come in throughout the budget presentation. So the total budget comes in at about $206 million, which is an increase of a little over 2% from the prior year. General government, which encompasses all of our core general government functions, public safety, public works, the town hall departments, library, recreation, etc., is up 3.5% in total expenses, and that's consistent with the override pledge. We've made some key investments in the school department this year of over $1 million to address substantial out-of-district and special education costs. And the school department has tentatively been allocated about $570,000 in Student Opportunities Act money from the Commonwealth to address some core needs. Now, there is some discussion about where state aid will end up and whether or not we'll actually see that money, but it was the year began with some positive investments in the school department. We are finally beginning a combined or shared facilities department. For those of you who may be new town meeting members, we've always operated sort of on a decentralized manner on the town side, in a centralized but under-resourced manner on the with school buildings. And as the town as a whole, the community owns well over $500 million in physical assets. We know we need to direct more resources towards our facilities, and to do that in a centralized fashion. We were finally in this budget, despite challenges, able to actually make that happen. We're already seeing the benefits of cooperation, even though we don't officially start until July. We're already identifying capital projects that we know we're going to drop the cost on, and more than that to come in later. We'll be able to make a pension catch-up or an additional contribution to the pension fund and the town's pension liability of about $500,000, depending on COVID. And we're continuing our OPEB contribution of $250,000, which is our contribution to the unfunded liability that every city and town in Massachusetts has for retiree health care. And last but not least, we have our continued separation of utility funds into enterprise funds, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as we get into the budget for those departments. So in terms of some of the potential budgetary and economic impacts of COVID-19, there's a few things we want to make sure everyone is aware of. One is that local economies tend to trend differently than state or national economies. Property tax collection generally remains stable throughout recessionary environments. You see the collection rate, which is the percentage of the total tax that we've levied, dip a little bit, but property tax generally is stable during a recessionary environment. We do know that things like meals tax and rooms tax will be impacted, as well as motor vehicle excise, which are other revenue sources to the town. But meals and excise tax are total about $1.7 million in a $205 million budget. Building permits and excise taxes, we anticipate taking a short-term dip. We've seen that with excise taxes. We actually have not seen that with building permits, believe it or not. The FY21 budget already went into it projecting only 91% of the last year's receipts. So we could actually suffer a 10% loss in our local receipt calculation, which is in the budget. So those are permits and fees and fines, which would total about $1.5 million and still meet building budget targets. The Finance Commission has come up with a plan that if in the fall we have an additional several $1 million, we could adjust if necessary to further reduce our revenue projections. As we've said, state aid, which is money we get from the Commonwealth, and it's important for town meeting members to know that it's not free money from the state, it's money that you as taxpayers in the Commonwealth actually pay to the state that gets reinvested back into cities and towns. So that's your income tax and your sales tax. The state has held the sales tax flat for several years, and the income tax has actually been coming down incrementally over many years. We receive about $9.7 million for the school department and about $5.4 million for what we call UGGA, or unrestricted general government aid. Now, there's discussion about whether or not the state will cut aid to cities and towns. The last recession, aid to school districts was never actually reduced, and the UGG aid, or the state aid, was reduced roughly 5 to 7%, depending on which numbers you want to look at. There were some formula changes. So even a big cut to state aid, we're still looking at within the margin of a few percent of the overall budget. Not that won't impact us in subsequent fiscal years, but for FY21, we should be relatively stable. As I said, FY22, which is the following fiscal year, is going to be more of a challenge depending on where the economy is. Now, what we've actually seen is, and I'll talk about this a little bit, our building permit numbers, which are important. That's an indication of how much growth there is in the community, how much growth there's likely to be in the tax levy, and how much investment there's going on in the community, how much construction is going on. Those numbers have actually held stable. We did $67,000 worth of permits in April and a similar number in May, and June is on target to beat that. So we're actually, even with the shutdown from COVID, and construction never really shut down in Norwood, we're still seeing a historic level of property investment in the community, which is a positive for our revenues. We're expecting potentially 1 or 2 more large permits before the end of the fiscal year. Even if they didn't come, we'd actually exceed our building permit target for the fiscal year. So I talked about some potential revenue changes in the fall in the event COVID-19 does start to have a substantial impact on our revenues. Now, what the state's seen is that some of the sales tax revenues and other numbers have dipped well down. There's certainly likely to be a loss there, but we don't know what the upward swing as the economy begins to reopen is. We know that there will be some pent-up demand that will show some record numbers for a period of time. We don't know if it'll be enough to offset what those losses are. We've seen restaurant numbers, and we don't get those numbers till the end of the quarter, dip quite a bit. We've seen them dip quite a bit, but we know that some of them are going to come back. Ed Ferris has asked if we can get the PowerPoint or PDF copy. It's only available as a YouTube video on the town website. Yes, we will get the PowerPoint itself out to everyone. We might be able to get that link posted, or a link posted in the comments while we're going through the presentation if we can get that done. If not, we'll get it done shortly afterwards, and we'll get it on the town website tonight. So what would we do if we do see our revenues change, if the state cuts aid, which we don't know yet, unfortunately, and if we see that local receipts are really, really hammered and there's sort of a permanent dip in local receipts? Well, we've identified $2.7 million worth of costs that we can reallocate. One of them would be we would pause the additional catch-up to the retirement fund. We headed into this year in a good fiscal condition, and we were going to make a catch-up contribution to our pension fund. So that's above the minimum amount that the state requires us to contribute to the fund. We're at about 82% funded, so we're one of the top 20 or 30 in the state in terms of funding, and much better than the state average, and certainly far better than the national average and the average for other states and local governments. Massachusetts, about 30 years ago, began mandating minimum contributions to pension funds. So as a result, you won't see the substantial fiscal distress or bankruptcy that you see in other communities that did not fund their pension systems properly. We've been required for the better part of 30 years to fund ours at an adequate level by state law. We're trying to go above and beyond that this year. The town did that once about 12 or 14 years ago, and kudos to former CFO Bob Thornton and FinCom member Judy Langone for heading that up. That was something that's allowed us to be in the good position that we're in now, so we'd like to continue that. But as it is sort of an above and beyond, if we have to reduce if our revenues go down, we would pause that. We were planning on placing about $425,000 into the stabilization fund, which is sort of the town's rainy day or savings fund. We would hold off on that contribution. We were additionally going to contribute ahead of schedule about $700,000 into the override stabilization fund, which is the fund set up to ensure that the override lasts the full 5 years. So we're not pulling anything from that fund, but it's already at a higher level than we anticipated, and the $700,000 was above what our projected $350,000 contribution would be. So we would hold off on that, and we would utilize free cash, which is surplus revenue from prior years if we had to the tune of about $1 million, offsetting over in total about $2.7 million in the town budget. So we already had some conservative revenue projections going in, and we've got a plan that if we need to go even further in the fall before we settle our tax rate in the fall, we have additional funds. Furthermore, we have been able to identify between the school department, Dr. Thompson and myself, some additional expenditures that we're going to hold off on making until the fall, some road work, some curriculum purchases, a few other things. So that way we have even more revenues available and holding off on some projects, and we've to be able to make sure we can balance the budget when we take a look at things in the fall. We've also delayed almost all of our capital items to the fall. We were originally going to pay cash for almost all of our capital this year. We've decided to turn that into borrowing, which is common for capital. Cities and towns in Massachusetts for newer town meeting members do not and are not allowed to borrow money to just operate on their budget, so we don't work the way the federal government does. We're only allowed to borrow money for capital projects, so physical plant items and equipment. So we propose to do that in borrowing in the fall. And even then we'd be able to take another look at most of the proposed capital projects in the fall and decide if we have to rearrange things in the event we face a worst case scenario, which we don't think we will, but we're just being prudent and cautious on those items by delaying them to the fall. There are, however, 3 capital items we will be discussing at the town meeting that are necessary to happen before September, and I'll explain those in brief before we get into the operating budgets. The first one is the school classroom projector system at the high school. This has to be up and running prior to September. This work could not take place while the schools were actually in session. It would be too disruptive to the classroom. And for anyone who's been in the high school in the last 10 years, this is really their chalkboard and their projector system. They, of course, have not used chalkboards, and I don't think that building ever saw chalkboards. So if the system weren't to work and it's getting the system's getting older, it's how they display audiovisual, it's how they display their work assignments. It serves as their chalkboard or a digital e-board. So that's a really critical project to keep the learning environment happening at the high school. We do have to replace some of our van fleet for the special ed van fleet. We contract out busing for what would you call your regular busing, so when the student gets on a regular bus, but the special ed vans where those students are often going to a different program, we own and operate those buses in and of ourselves. This was originally 4 buses at about $30,000. We've had to increase the amount. Amazon has been buying buses up, not just locally, but all around the country. I say buses, I should say small vans. So that's actually driven the cost up, but we need to get that purchase in so we can have those ready for the fall. And the last item is our annual water relining loan. So every year we do a lot of water work, but we're eligible to apply to the Mass Water Resources Authority, which is the government entity that we purchase our water and sewer capacity from, for a zero interest loan to reline water pipes. And we have to make that authorization within the fiscal year to make sure we don't lose out on the interest on the zero interest loan. So that's why these 3 items were essential to get done before the end of fiscal year. All of our other capital projects have been delayed until the fall. So a couple positives on the budget. As I said, FY21 revenues were strong going into March. A return to new normal will allow no major drops in this area. If we don't have to make adjustments for COVID, we will be putting $1.1 million into the bank. We still have about $100,000 in unspent levy capacity, and that's the ability to not reach our 2.5% property tax cap. And that's even after accounting for about $40,000 worth of new exemptions that will likely be on the ballot, or I should say on the town meeting warrant in the fall for veterans and seniors. We would be contributing an additional $500,000 to the pension fund. And as I said, new growth is actually strong in the community. Construction is still taking place, which is a positive thing. So you'll notice my numbers don't exactly total out to your budget number here. It's a cut of a spreadsheet. But here's the budget in brief, and I just want to explain how we look at the budget in this way. We categorize our departments according to state codes or state accounting codes. So you'll see about 3 is actually education. So it looks like there's only about 10 different budgets. It's quite a lot more complicated than that. But this is the overall total budget as it looks. And makes a little bit more sense if we go into the operating budgets. So when we talk about general government, and this is outside of public safety, really I'd refer to it as sort of the town hall departments, if you will. We have the Selectmen's Office, the General Manager, the Finance Commission, Finance and Accounting, and we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. There's 2 items I want to pull out just to talk about before we get to those departments, and I've highlighted them here on the screen. One is the Information Technology Department, or our IT department. You'll notice a large increase there. The overwhelming majority of that cost is as we begin onboarding our new ERP software system. So about 2 years ago, the town spent $1.7 million, it was more than that. It was $2.7 million to purchase new enterprise resource software for the town. So we're basically redoing our entire accounting, payroll, AP suite. And it's costly, it's complicated. We have a lot of complex municipal finance laws we have to comply with. So that jump there is as we begin building the cost of the annual maintenance into the system as we launch different modules. We will be launching the tax assessing module this summer. We'll be launching the an online inspection and permitting software this summer. We launched our accounting portion of it last summer, and over the winter, kudos to our treasurer's office and Cheryl Golden, our payroll person, we launched our payroll portion of the program, and everyone still got paid, which was quite a miracle when you're converting a large and complex system like that. But as we convert over and we complete our conversion, we now have the regular annual maintenance costs getting built into the budget. So we'll likely see 1 or 2 more years of an increase in the IT budget to absorb those additional costs as we go to the normal operating cost of that system. The other item that's there, you'll notice is highlighted. It says GG COLA to be allocated. I know that sounds confusing. The terminology we use sometimes is a little confusing. We haven't settled all of our contracts with employees yet. A majority of town employees, as in any town in Massachusetts, are in a union, and we settle contracts every year. You're required to enter into a contract, and usually those come with either cost of living increases or other adjustments. When you haven't settled them yet, but you anticipate there's some cost likely there, you have to hold money aside, and that money is there, what's the hold aside, depending on how we settle our contracts. We have settled a few of them. I mention that because you'll notice some departments, it may appear as if salaries are not going up. That's not likely the case. We would have to make these changes after we've concluded settling all the various contracts with our 8 unions. So as we jump into general government here, the Selectmen's Office, I got to readjust my screen here just a little bit, folks. Sorry about that. You'll notice no substantial changes in the Selectmen's Office budget. Now, this is an example of some of the budgets that we're going to go through fairly quickly. If I happen to skip by it and then you have a question that comes up down the road, that's fine. You can always ask me later, or you can ask at the Q&A session in the end, because some of these town hall departments, if you will, are fairly small departments, and the budgets are actually pretty vanilla. Most of the general government budget is pretty vanilla this year, as is the school budget. So no real changes in the Selectmen's budget, net difference of about $4,000. This is the general manager's budget, and I'm going to see if I can just minimize this so I can get a little bit more of a, there we go. No substantial change in the general manager's office. It appears that there's actually a decrease. Again, the COLAs have not been implemented in there, and we're continuing to adjust our cost allocation to the light department. And when we get to the light department, I'll talk about that a little bit. Most of the numbers here you'll see under the operating expenses are flat. That's actually consistent with most general government departments. I should have mentioned earlier, departments were told to submit their budgets flat with only contractual increases or known increases. You know, if you have a cost of a service that was going up, because we had to be very careful about where we had flexibility in covering our costs. So we made a few investments in the general government budget overall this year, but very few, much fewer than we wanted to, because we had to live within that 3.5% cap as a result of the override. Bring my chat back up. All right, the Finance Commission budget, as you see here, this is actually just for the stenographer or the assistants to the Finance Commission, and then the cost of our audit is built into the Finance Commission budget. No real change there other than a slight change in the audit cost and the salary cost. The assessor's office, the budget has been decreased. We have completed our 10-year decennial revaluation. The assessors do a great job here in Norwood, and they're required every 10 years under state law to do a complete list and measure or complete revaluation of all properties in town. They have done that. They no longer need those funds. They have decreased their budget accordingly, and we're appreciative of that. The treasurer's office, again, you'll see here, it appears a slight decrease. There will be a small adjustment for cost of living increases coming from that general government COLA to be allocated. But the treasurer also was able to keep his budget flat as requested, and they continue to do a good job collecting taxes, and they've done a great job throughout the process. Again, relatively small department, but they are responsible for collecting the taxes and the other fees that we use to operate the town. So town council, this is our legal services budget. You'll notice an increase here, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is it's a budget that we've really been under budgeting for years. So the town uses outside legal counsel. Most communities our size use outside legal counsel. We have a retainer with a firm for sort of our general legal matters. We retain separate labor counsel. We also have specialized attorneys in different areas like assessing or housing or the airport that we use to provide special guidance in those areas. There's an increase here. I would anticipate this increase actually taking place again in the next couple of years. It's just a budget that every year at town meeting, and we'll be doing it this year, we seem to move money in. So it's an indication that the actual use and the need of the town is not matching what we have budgeted. And it's tough to want to put money here as opposed to somewhere else, but we're trying to adjust every year with some of these budgets to actually bring the number into the actual budgeted number that we're expending. Okay. The human resources budget is here. Now, you'll notice a large decrease in this budget, and that's not that we've cut any positions from the budget in this office. What we have done is we allocated a part-time benefited position to the HR department last year. We've actually turned over the entire HR department in the course of a year. Our new HR director has been here, I believe, a year and 2 months. It feels like 10 years. Molly Keene, she's a fantastic HR director. And the whole staff in the office is turned over. So we found that with some new practices and some new procedures in the office and some efficiencies that we found by changing things over and restructuring it, we didn't need to allocate that additional part-time benefited position there. We've also in the HR office been able to take on some assistance to the schools. We're helping with some job postings. We're coordinating some of the benefits information. It's all the same. The town is the same employer. The benefits information is largely the same. So we've been able to help with that. I think that's been helpful. HR has been able to provide guidance to the school department in some areas on a number of issues, and we look forward to continuing that. What it's let us do is pull out that position. It was budgeted. It was not an actual person, and it came from another department, so it was not an ad last year, and we've allocated it to the rec department, and we'll talk about that when we get to the rec department's budget. The HR department budget is good. We would like to continue increasing the training budget that we have available. Most of the departments have training in their budgets for their specific department. HR tries to absorb some of the town-wide training that we do, and we'd like to do more of it. We've been successful in the last couple of years in doing some diversity and inclusion training and some implicit bias training. We'd like to continue that as well, but those programs often do, it's often cheaper for us to sometimes train 20 or 30 of our own employees in-house. So we've been able to build this up over the last few years. It's healthy, but we could certainly use more investment there. And the more HR staff that we have, the better we can assist working with the school department and taking on other responsibilities. But the department's been running exceptionally well, given that it was entirely turned over in the course of a year. The IT budget, I mentioned earlier, no changes to the IT staff in the budget. The big increase there is the cost of managing. It's two things. It's mainly the managing of our software system, our new Munis, our new accounting system. We're also trying to centralize some of the IT costs into the IT budget. An example, a couple of years ago, cell phones or devices were all budgeted individually in departments, and we had, I don't know how many accounts we had. It was 15 or 18 different accounts. We've begun trying to centralize some of those items into the IT department so that they can be centrally managed and we can get an idea of the cost and control it a little bit better. One great project that the IT department's working on with school IT is a VoIP system for the town. And originally the town was moving towards a VoIP or voice over internet system, and the school department was going to go with the system as well. We managed to pick a system in the middle that both sides could work, and we're going to have one system. So we'll actually be able to dial from one phone to an extension at any school building and vice versa. The total net difference by doing it together was a savings of well over $100,000. There'll be a small capital item in the fall town meeting for what we need to complete the build out of the system, but we're actually able to get the whole thing up and running with an allocation from a few years ago to start the process. But by working together and having one system and having it centralized, we've been able to save quite a bit of money for the town and the school department. So we're looking forward to that. And it's one of our first sort of IT collaborations. We do sometimes use different software systems. And I know people ask that question, why do the schools use this and the town uses that? Sometimes it has to do with different entities have different cost requirements, or I should say have different cost abilities. The school is able to use Google as a format or as a platform, and they actually get it for free. The town may look at converting over anyway and paying it, even if it's more than what we currently use in the next couple of years, because it would be better to be on one system, but we don't get access to the free system. It's only for education purposes, and but we're looking at some of those in the next couple of years to see how we can streamline that and just try to bring some of the systems we use together in both areas of IT. We function differently in terms of what the town provides, and the school is a different model, but we're starting to identify some of these software areas we can actually just use the same software, and it takes a little give and take on both sides, and both sides have been doing that great in the last couple of years. The town clerk's office, you'll notice no substantial increases here. Credit to the town clerk's office for overseeing the election this year. We will see in the election budget that the election budget is going to need to go up. We have several elections this year, but the town clerk's office once again is flat. We just segregated this out about 2 years ago. We used to have the town clerk and accountant together. It is now a separate department, operates on its own, and they continue to provide great service to us. You'll notice an increase in the elections and registration budget. Again, this relates to the fact that we have a presidential election as well as a primary election in this next fiscal year. The state is also talking about different means for early voting. The Senate, I believe, has passed a mail-in voting option. That's all going to come at an additional cost. So this budget may need adjustment down the road. The state, the last time they did early voting, did give us money to help cover the cost of early voting. Unfortunately, I think they gave us maybe $1,500, and it nowhere came near that amount of money. But we will likely need some additional election money once we know what different mandates are going to come from the state. Community Development Department, slight change here. This is where we house all of our planning, zoning, conservation, the Economic Development Commission, the CPA is supported out of here, and it's the staff in the office. The conservation agent is retiring, and the agent position is being converted. It's a part-time benefited position. It's being converted into a full-time benefited position that will be a environmental, it will be the conservation agent and an environmental planner in one description. So no net change in the number of benefit packages available, but just trying to modernize the function and department, take better use of the downtime. There's a lot of grant opportunities out there that we want to go for. Some of the CPA projects we're doing require a little bit more administration on the project. Acquiring open space is a good thing as we've started to creep in and do it little by little. We want to do more of that and make sure we're doing it well, and paying attention to those restrictions and those easements is complex. There's also a lot of park acquisition grants that we want to be able to go after, and having the planner hat as well in this position will be very beneficial to us in getting some of that grant money. We also may look at developing pocket parks or other areas where we have some little open space, and that change here will be positive. One item to note here at the bottom there, there's always a question usually about conservation land acquisition, that $10,000 line. I don't have the exact dollar amount that's in that fund, but that actually gets transferred into a fund every year for the Conservation Commission to purchase conservation land if it comes up. Oftentimes there's a small wetlands or another area they may be able to make a purchase with. So that's the deposit into that fund. My guess is it's somewhere in the mid $60,000 range, because I believe it was around $40,000 2 years ago, and we continue to add to the fund, and I don't believe it has been spent out since then. As we continue on with more trails in the community, which is another thing that our Trails Committee has been doing a great job on, the ability to develop grants and have support from a fully realized community development department, and in addition, an environmental planner position is going to be critical. Municipal building expenses. So this is sort of a catch-all budget for two things, primarily town hall. The salary lines in here are the custodians for our town hall. It's also some of our other buildings that the town maintains. You'll see there's some general lines in there. We do own a lot of smaller properties. We try to cite them, we try to segregate them out. Forbes Hill is on here. The Morse House is on here. Forbes Hill, of course. The OCC, so the OCC's just for newer town meeting members, you may not know, that's you probably know it as a restaurant. It's an old fire station right across from town hall. The town actually owns that building. We own the land around the building. We lease it out to the restaurant. The town actually makes quite a bit of money off that lease. We just re-signed a 10-year lease with an option to extend for 10 years. And I believe the 10-year value of that lease to the town, including the taxes and everything, exceeds $1 million. So it's a very valuable lease to the town, but we are responsible in the lease for any of the outside maintenance. So we just try to make sure we cost that out. Some of these costs will get moved to the new facilities department once they're sort of no longer, and this actually almost all of these costs will, as we start centralizing those costs as well. A couple of smaller general government budget items here. The top one there, printing, annual town report. We do spend about $3,000 printing the annual town report. We've tried to reduce this by printing less town reports and asking people to view it online. Oftentimes we're left with a lot of books, and they cost quite a few dollars to print. The budget books that many of you receive as town meeting members, we do spend thousands of dollars printing those. It's tough because we'd like to go into just a digital format. It is a little tough though. It's quite a dense book, as those of you who have read it have looked for, and there's a lot of information we include in there. But anyway, that's the printing of the annual town report. That 198 GG COLA to be allocated, as I said earlier, is where we budget for anticipated contractual obligation increases for contracts yet to be settled. The 199 item there, the general government, that's just sort of, again, a catch-all for when the town needs to do certain work. If we some of our smaller boards and committees have their budgets in there, the town meeting expense budget is in there. We have some consultants, so usually when we say we need to bring somebody in to look at something, this is sort of a catch-all for general government for some of those items that we're able to do. And I'll just call out Snark. There's the Southern Norfolk They provide assistance to adults with disabilities, and that's the contribution the town makes, and they provide those services on the town's behalf. So we're going to go into public safety, and the overall public safety budget includes police, fire, the building commissioner, public safety building maintenance, emergency management, and traffic control and fire alarms. Why do we categorize all those as public safety? The state basically lumps them into a series of categories. Overall, there are no major changes to public safety. The COLA is included for the police and police superiors, which are the police officers and the police patrol, as those contracts have been settled. And the public safety building, which we'll talk about when we get to the maintenance, is starting to age quite a bit. Let's get into these department budgets. So police salaries. You'll notice there's no major changes here. There are no staff changes being proposed. I do want to point out the department head salary. It appears that the chief of police is getting quite the raise, and that's actually not the case. Actually, his salary is not quite market rate for police chiefs in the area. We've changed the way we handle most of our management contracts, and we're going to really a straight salary formula. What happens for police, and it happens at fire departments, is often as individuals advance through the ranks, they retain certain benefits that are designed for an hourly employee. And if they were to lose those benefits when they move into a management role, their salary would oftentimes be quite a bit less than the people they would be supervising. So rather than have a complex holiday pay and shift differential pay and everything else that comes that you would see for a firefighter, for a police officer, for a police superior, what we've done with the police chief, and we've done it with the fire chief, we've done it with the town accountant, my contract, and all these other contracts, is they're really moving towards a straight, clear salary or a salary plus model. So that way it's not hidden in the budget anywhere where you would see a number in there and then there's all this other money that actually is regular salary. It also has to do with conforming with the state's accounting practices to make sure we're actually accounting for things correctly. So you'll notice there were some decreases in items here. In particular, some of the overtime, which is the shift differential, and then there was a decrease in one or two other lines here to account for that. So that wasn't an increase as much as that was just a shifting. So we're trying to clarify our management contracts out so they're a little bit clear and you can get an idea of what the actual department head salary is. As we've gone through the accounting process and the conversion to our accounting system, we've had to make a lot of little changes to make sure we're conforming with the state's accounting practices. So some of these numbers fluctuate a little bit, but we try to identify, for instance, police overtime, where, whether it's shift replacement because somebody's out sick, whether it's they're in court, whether it's investigative overtime or something different. So you'll notice that the police operating budget, and I'll see if I can get my cursor here, really those are the numbers down here. Again, they came in flat. And we're happy with that. We would like to allocate some additional money. We moved money around to help the vehicle maintenance. It's a line we've been underfunding. We are in the process of converting our fleet over to potentially hybrids. We've purchased the first few of them from the Dodge Chargers to it's an Explorer hybrid. That Explorer hybrid was rated by the Michigan State Police as pursuit rated, so we're happy. So far they're working good. It's obviously only a couple of months in. We should see a decrease in maintenance costs and a decrease in fuel costs over the next few years as we convert the fleet over to those vehicles. You'll notice down here under capital expenses for the police department, the fleet replacement is built in. That number is probably a little low to continue to replace the police fleet over time. The other benefit to swapping out these vehicles, other than there's a green benefit, there's a maintenance reduction benefit, and there'll be a gas benefit, is that they can be reutilized in other departments. The current vehicles that we use, the Dodge Chargers, we can't really reutilize those as spare vehicles or as staff vehicles in other departments that may need to go around and be four-wheel drive or do some work. So we're looking forward to good things to come. We have high hopes that these hybrids will work out and we'll continue to utilize them. Fire salaries, the fire department budget remains unchanged. We've got a question here. Is there a professional development or continuing education line item? Sure. So there's a couple of things that I will point out here. Salary, tuition allowance, as well as that's one of the primary police career training incentive lines. Police training is a big topic nowadays. Every officer in Massachusetts is required by law to undergo 40 hours of annual training, and they often get a lot of beyond that. That's the minimum, and we have to pay them for it. And we actually do that by not taking them, or I should say we do that and we take them off the road when they do that training. There are some departments out there that just ask an officer to sit in on the training and they go out if they get a call. We do not do that. When an officer is assigned to training, that is specifically what they do. All of our officers either have a military background or a college degree. That's required to get hired here in Norwood. I believe 33% of the veterans of the department are veterans. The remainder, who are non-veterans, have a college degree, and most of those are actually 4-year degrees. We don't have too many 2-year degrees in Norwood. Chief Brooks, if you're on the line, would you like to talk just momentarily about I'll stop sharing my screen, about police training and just give an overview of all the training that goes on in the department?
Yeah, so you captured it fairly well. By law in Massachusetts, all police officers have to receive 40 hours of training. At one time, we sent officers out to a regional academy, kind of 1 or 2 a week. I was a little concerned about the quality of training, the level of information they were getting out there, the training atmosphere. We completely retooled that. Now, when the state mandates courses, and of the 40 hours, they mandate about 32 hours of that training. We send at least 2 officers to a train-the-trainer school so that we have our own in-house instruction, and then we train our own officers here in the classroom here at the police station. So I think that that's really brought up the quality of training that we do. We typically go beyond the 40 hours. We offer our officers specialized training as well. We do, and this is in the news these days, use of force training, de-escalation training, communication skills, and by having our own training staff trained up to do that, and then training our own officers in-house, I really think that it's brought us up several notches.
Thank you, Chief. And one other item to mention, the police department in Norwood has probably one of the most, aggressive is probably a poor choice of words, but one of the best mental health training programs for police officers in the Commonwealth. We go generally above and beyond, not just with the train the trainer, but Chief, can you just talk about some of the, specifically the training for individuals with mental health and what we've done with Officer Shore? Because I think that's worth calling out specifically, because that's actually unique. Not too many departments do that.
I think it is unique. So I'm on the board of directors at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and a couple of years ago, we announced a program called the One Mind Campaign, the 4 parts to it. One is that the department has a policy for serving the mentally ill, so we had one anyway, that a department has a relationship with a service provider. We have a formal relationship with Riverside Community Care, that all dispatchers and all officers receive an additional 8 hours of training in something called mental health first aid, which a lot of it is identifying particular mental illnesses, and then training them on the communication skills to help people and to help calm situations involving those folks. And then beyond that, that at least 20% of police officers on the department have gone to 40 hours of additional training on top of all of that in what's called CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Team. And we shot well beyond the 20%. I think now we're at about 35% of our officers have all gone to CIT. And actually, operationally, what we've done in addition to that is on our shift roster, there's a designation beside each name whether they're CIT certified or not. So when we send a radio card to a mental illness call, if that officer is not CIT certified, the unit that's dispatched has to have an officer who's CIT certified. So we always bring an upper level of training and care to all calls involving mental illness. Massachusetts leads the way of all of the states. We have more One Mind Campaign certified departments, and Norwood was one of the first to achieve that.
Thank you, Chief. All right, let me go back to our presentation here. So jumping into fire salaries, no major changes here. Last year, we were able to make a key investment in the fire department in that we added a second deputy fire chief position, and it is already working out well, as we had the Ron Maggio retire recently after many decades of service to the town. We now have Deputy Chief Dave Hayes and Deputy Chief John Cody, and they're already working on a variety of training and other administrative initiatives, and we're very happy to see that. We did last year add for the first time about $20,000 in fire department training that's specific to the fire department or specific to fire service. Most of our training dollars in the fire department do go to the EMS side, of course, given the number of certifications and requirements to maintain an ambulance service. We'd like to continue that. We'd like to increase that fire training. We'll be able to do some more in-house training now that we have the 2 deputy fire chief positions. One will focus as a training director of sorts. So we'd like to continue to see an increase in that area. You'll notice some of the items here have increased from FY21 to FY20 to 21, including substitution. Really what some of that is again, we're there's things we'd like to do in the budget, and then there's the things we have to do. And one of the things we have to do is realize if we're spending a certain amount of money in an area, we need to bring the budget up to meet that area. You, of course, could look at reducing the expense, but if you know you're going to spend $9 a year on something, you really need to budget $9 a year. We don't feel it's fair or equitable to keep going to town meeting every year saying, well, we undershot this by a lot of money, so please give us more money and let us move money around. So it leads to a budget that's not always the most interesting, and you can't always necessarily make the investments you want, but you got to sort of take care of business first and pay your bills first rather than under budget some items. In terms of operating expenses at the fire department, some increases in medical services. That's just for the cost of medical supplies are increasing, and vehicle maintenance. Otherwise, just some adjustments here as well to try to make sure that we're meeting our actual cost in the budget for what we need. And we've been pretty strict with this budget for a while, so there's definitely some room for growth there to make sure we're at least covering our costs on the fire department operating budget. Before we jump, sorry, I skipped around here a little bit. The next item, and this is the bane of the fire chief's existence and a constant problem that we're facing, is the public safety building maintenance. The powers that be many years ago decided that the fire chief would be responsible for the public safety building or the public safety building complex maintenance. Once we have a new facilities department established, that will take that burden off of the fire chief, who can focus then fully on fire service and EMS, which is what he's there to do. This building is about 20 years old. It's in fair shape, and it's important to note that it's a building that is used largely 24/7. The administrative offices on the police side aren't necessarily the second and third floor 24/7, but certainly the first floor of the police department and the entire fire department are used 24/7. So the building does get more use than an average building. It is starting to age. There's quite a few items in the capital plan that we'll take up in the fall for repairs to this building. We know that the HVAC system, which has never worked very well from the beginning, is reaching the end of its life expectancy. We're in the process of designing a new system and bringing forward a plan next year to replace that system. The utility costs are going up as the building ages. The alarm system will need to get addressed next year. It was a proprietary system. The fire department kitchen needs some adjustment. That's a project that the facilities department, we believe, can save the community probably over $200,000 on, as we start to have the skills in-house to do some of that work by combining our resources and sharing our resources. But the building is starting to age. It's going to start to require more work and more investment in the community. We're looking at what we need to get done first. We know that the HVAC system is the big ticket item. We'll probably be looking at around the $2 million replacement of that system sometime next year to guide us for the next 20 or 30 years. Again, it does get a lot of use, but this building is starting to age. We've somewhat under budgeted some of the regular maintenance items here, and we will again at this year be moving some money around the town meeting to cover them. So it is a budget that does need to continue to go up to ensure that we can have enough funds to really cover the actual cost of the building operating it. But this is just the operating cost of the budget itself for the building, which again is aging and starting to show its age, not necessarily aging so gracefully. Bouncing back to the building commissioner budget, and the building commissioner is just thrown into public safety because again, that's how the state considers its accounting. No real change here. Longtime building commissioner Mark Schubert did retire. We will need to transfer to pay him out his remaining vacation time at the special. However, he has retired and Matt Walsh has taken over as commissioner, so we're very happy about that. The department is fully staffed and they have been busy. Some departments have had a short-term dip in business. Unfortunately, they have not, and the complexity of doing inspections in a COVID world has increased. So our inspectors have been working continuously as they've gone, as we've gone through COVID. And we're anticipating bringing online online building permits within the next few, maybe the next 6 months to a year, which we think will help speed up some of the administration of the building department. We have, or speed up the process. We have 4 great inspectors and a great admin assistant in that department, Debbie Frangioso, who keeps the economy running in Norwood and keeps things moving. But again, a fairly vanilla budget. I don't think this budget has actually changed much in many years. Emergency management and fire alarms. So traffic control and fire alarms. We budget a certain amount for emergency management every year. We're rare that we don't have a full-time emergency management director. However, that role's always been filled by Assistant General Manager Bernie Cooper, and he does a great job at it. Obviously, it's an area where if we have the ability to, we would like to invest more in. COVID has kind of thrown many communities for a loop where the standard practice in emergency management really in the post 9/11 world has focused around developing a command team and a command center and segregating out where your different areas where your staff will work and what they'll work on, and everyone working together in one big room. And of course, as a result of COVID, we had to kind of throw that playbook out of the out of the window, the budget is enough to take care of sort of our core emergency management and civil defense needs. We'd love to see it grow and be more robust in future years. It is a challenge because, as you know, if we had last year come to the town and said, let's spend a couple $100,000 on pandemic preparation, people probably would have said, gee, that sounds a little remote. And it turns out we would have been geniuses, but it's tough to budget and then not know. But it's holding its own. There's just a slight trim there to adjust some of the costs down for some of the systems we maintain to communicate in the event of an emergency. The traffic control and fire alarm is just the maintenance of our traffic controls and our fire alarm pull box system. Again, only a slight adjustment there to account for when we have to do some work on those systems. The public works budget. Now, if you were moving on to public works, if you were to look at this sheet here, you would say, wow, there's a $14 million decrease. The DPW is doing great and they've cut their expenses $14 million. That's not the case. They are doing great. They're actually doing phenomenal. But when we get into water and sewer, we'll talk about how we're moving into enterprise funds accounting. We're trying to segregate out where our money is coming and going, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means. So you'll see here the public works salary budget is relatively flat. And if everyone will give me 1 second, I'm actually going to pull up the budget presentation on my other monitor here, so that way I can read all the numbers. It'll take just a second. There were no major changes in the DPW budget compared to as with other budgets. We were asking them to keep it as flat as they can, and they have done a great job in keeping it flat, which we certainly appreciate. Just pull this up here. So the DPW budget overall there, it looks like it's a large decrease, but that's the salary amounts that were allocated to the water and sewer, and we'll talk in a moment about what that means. Same thing here when you look at the operating expense budget for the DPW, it appears that there's a decrease there of well over $1 million. That relates to water and sewer costs being allocated correctly. The engineering department, you'll see really no change there. As I said, most of the budgets are fairly vanilla. Highway maintenance and snow and ice removal. So what's booked in this budget here, and we'll talk about our road work in just a moment, is our sorry, I'm a little bit backed up here. So that highway maintenance budget is the majority of the money we spend on highway maintenance, including our road work. And that is road work above and beyond our Chapter 90 money. Chapter 90 money is money the state gives us for road work. We receive about $900,000 a year from the state in Chapter 90 money. That's actually paid for through the gas tax. So just if anyone wonders where that comes from. And then we allocate about $650,000 of our own money or general fund money towards roads as well. It's a good amount. It's better than some towns that spend virtually zero. And Norwood's unique that we spend 100% of our Chapter 90 money on road paving. There are a lot of towns out there that buy big equipment with it and do all sorts of other projects with it. We spend it on actual paving. Now, we're nowhere near we'd like to be, but we're getting better and we've been doing really well. We had a nice aggressive season of road work this past year. We'd like to continue that. The state may increase our Chapter 90 allocation. The Senate has voted for it, but until the state actually passes a budget, we have no idea what that number will be. We may hold off on some road work going into the fall just to make sure if we have to make a mid-year budget adjustment, we're not affecting staff. So we're not looking at changing out police or fire or teachers in the middle of the year. But we'll get some road work done this year. And we'll also be proposing to the town in the fall an infrastructure plan to do some borrowing to increase the amount of road work and water work that we're doing to try to catch up and get us into a position where we're ahead of the game. So that's 422 highway maintenance, and 423 is snow and ice removal. Last year, as part of the operational override, which ended up being a very prudent and timely decision on behalf of the town, we increased the amount of our snow and ice budget. We have been deficit spending, as most towns do, on snow and ice removal for many years, sometimes to the tune of $600,000 or $700,000. Of course, the first year, as things happen, that we increased the snow and ice budget to a 5-year average, we have almost no winter. We can't reduce that amount, or we wouldn't be able to deficit spend, which would cause a problem in a winter where you have to actually get the roads plowed. But we're happy that we finally seem to have addressed this issue. Now, I'll say knock on wood, because watch this year have a particularly difficult winter and we'll be well overdrawn again. But that'll help us settle out some of the other areas in the budget as we go on, and that budget remains unchanged. It's always a good place if we had available revenue to keep increasing that number to keep up with costs. We don't want to say, great, we've solved it, and then 5 years from now, costs are going up 3 or 4% a year, and we're not keeping up. And we never want to find ourselves in the position where we were before, where we knew without any reasonable doubt we could not get through a year without deficit spending on snow and ice. And some towns do that. It's really not a great financial practice. So Norwood's doing things right by making sure we're trying to at least budget what we can reasonably assume we're going to spend. Sometimes the numbers in there will move around as we just try to be a little bit more accurate about what we're actually spending on it. Is it the salt? Is it the overtime? Is it the contracted services? And moving that around. Street lighting and waste collection and disposal, two of my favorite topics. So the town is required to pay for street lighting, even though we own our own electric company. We still have to pay for the electricity that we utilize, and we've reduced that a little bit. We don't anticipate this number going down anymore, and it could possibly go up depending on the total street lighting cost. We've completed an LED conversion. And as you'll notice, just a couple of years ago, we were budgeting about $360,000. So we look to have shaved that number by about 2/3. Worst case scenario, if it were to bump back up, we've at least shaved it in half by converting to LEDs, as well as having the benefit of a much greener system. But that is money we do have to pay for streetlight, the cost of our streetlights. Now on the waste collection, you'll notice that there is an increase here. We are seeing waste costs go up like many communities. Now, Norwood, several years ago, credit to, I believe it was former Selectman Alan Howard and Mark Ryan in the DPW, and Mr. Cooper and Mr. Carroll, for negotiating a contract with our waste vendor that recycling would not exceed the cost of trash. In hindsight, that probably saved the town close to $1 million. Our waste company did ask us to renegotiate that contract about a year ago when things started getting topsy-turvy in the recycling market. We politely told them that we are not interested in doing that, and we will certainly not do that. The contract is up for renewal, but waste costs as a whole are going up. We got a great question here. Is it possible to create a reserve for snow and ice that we can dip into in high cost years and build in low expense years? I actually love that idea, and I would like to do that. You could do it as a special purpose stabilization fund, where at the end of the year, you take any unspent snow and ice money and it goes into that fund, or it goes into a reserve fund for snow and ice. So that way, in a given year, if you do have an extra $500,000, you just take it out of cash. So that's actually a great idea that we should look at doing. We've talked about some other special purpose stabilization funds to just kind of keep the town stable. Massachusetts is unique in how we tend to do our municipal finance. And by unique, I mean the other 49 states do it pretty much one way, and Massachusetts does it our own unique way. But that's actually a great idea. And there's other areas we would look at setting up funds like that where we have, especially when you have good years, and elections is one of them, where you sort of put any remaining funds, or you establish a fund so that in a year where you know you need to draw down, you're not scrambling to pull it somewhere else from the budget or to try to get money out of free cash. You say, we've got money set aside for that. It's a good conservative fiscal process to make, and we'd like to see more of those in a couple of years. We're starting to get there with our enterprise funds, but that's actually a really great idea. One question we get on trash is, why not a trash fee? And the way we book our trash costs now, the property tax base pays for it, which means commercial properties pay for it, but they don't actually receive trash services. We do it just for owned properties and condos and multifamilies up to, I think it's 5 or 6 units. So the large apartment complexes in town, for instance, we don't take care of their trash. That's a required private entity. They're required to take care of that privately. We could look at a trash fee. If we did, I'd certainly want that to go towards road paving, but it really hits the residential taxpayer quite a bit and kind of frees up the commercial properties from bearing that burden. So it's a catch-22. Now, a big property like an auto dealer isn't really going to save enough in their taxes to notice the difference, but what you're going to do is you're going to take, everyone would start paying about a $200 or $300 fee for trash at your single family home, and it sort of takes the burden and just dumps it on the single family homeowner, takes it off the commercial properties, and it takes it off the large apartment complexes. So there's really an equity issue there to talk about. It's always something you could look at, and again, if it went to road paving, I think that would be a great idea. But it is really kind of, I think I've called it a screw job in the past to the average single family homeowner. So it's not an easy solution to just generate more revenue, and it would be a fairly hefty cost for the average single family homeowner. So something always worth discussing. So water and sewer budget, one of my favorite topics, talking about water and sewer. And I think here's where I'll take a minute to talk about what enterprise fund accounting is. If you think about the town as a small business, what we sort of do now is we kind of dump everything into one pot. So all the money sort of goes into one thing and it all comes out of one thing. Well, cities and towns run certain business-like functions like a water department, a sewer department, in our case also an electric department and a broadband department. And what an enterprise fund is supposed to be is that you're actually segregating the monies out from that to make sure that the water and sewer users and the electric users are paying for 100% of the cost of that utility. What you don't want is what we call the government nerds, a cross-subsidization of the general fund or a cross-subsidization of your enterprise funds. And what that simply means is you as a property taxpayer want to make sure that your property tax pays for the general government or your general tax levy, and that your property tax is not paying for somebody else's sewer use. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, the average residential user doesn't actually use that much water and sewer. And the average residential homeowner doesn't use that much electricity. They're actually small portions of those overall budgets, even though we have 30,000 residents. Commercial users account for a huge portion of water, sewer, and electric, the majority in both cases. We have some electric users whose electric bill is $200,000 a month. We have some water and sewer users where their water and sewer bill is well over $100,000 a month. So you want to make sure that if the water and sewer fund takes a loss, if it will, and it can, it's like a business function, we project a rate and we try to cover as much money, that the people that use the water and sewer have to pay the rate to cover the total cost of water and sewer. Otherwise, it's coming out of the tax levy, and vice versa. Now, they're technically town-owned enterprises, so if they did really well, money can go back to what we call the general fund. But we want to make sure we're segregating out those funds so that we're not hitting the tax levy, which is limited by state law, with too many water and sewer costs. And if the water and sewer cost comes in short one year, that comes out of our surplus revenue, or what we call free cash. That money is used to balance the budget sometimes. It's used for capital expenses. It's used to put in the bank. It's used to do sometimes fun and nice projects, and it's used to help our financial flexibility. Water and sewer sort of needs to stand on its own. So what we're trying to do is move the funds over so that they stand on their own as separate enterprise funds. Now, it's really just an accounting change, but what it makes sure that we do is all the costs associated with water, sewer, electric, and broadband are paid for by water, sewer, electric, and broadband. Think of it as a separate pot of money. The problem is, not being a particularly wealthy community, we don't have millions and millions of dollars that we can just play with. So we can't just say, well, let's take $3 million and throw it in the water and sewer fund. Those of you who work for a small business, the way to think about it is your business's sort of checking account. You know that that number goes up and down, and I guess it relates to your personal checking account as well. So on July 1st, we can't just say, well, book all the water and sewer costs and all the revenues out of this one account or this one checking account, because sometimes it may go down and we can't actually deficit spend in it. So you need to build up a fund balance first to make sure that you can run the enterprise or the business all out of this fund. And second, you actually want to build that fund balance up so you have a cushion in a bad year. So if we do have a shortage in water and sewer, it comes out of that, and we're not taking it from free cash that could go to buy vans or police cruisers or fix a building here or there or help the budget. We also want to make sure we're building up that fund so that way if we ever had the loss of a large commercial client or a large commercial customer, we can mitigate the rate impact over a couple of years. Our largest water and sewer user, for instance, is responsible for, I think, $1.5 million to $2 million of our water and sewer. And that's great. That helps offset everyone's rate. If they went out of business tomorrow, we'd be looking at perhaps a 15 to 18% water and sewer increase right through the roof, right away. Now that would hit the average residential homeowner, but some folks who maybe have a $70 or $80 bill as a percentage or $100 bill, it's not necessarily too crippling. It's a challenge, but it's not too bad. But other businesses too, then absorbing it, all of a sudden, if they're paying $500,000 a year, and it could actually start to cost job loss, it could cost other businesses to go under, cause a lot of problems. And we don't want to have a rate shock where rates go up 20% or 25%. So if we build up a stable enough fund balance over time, we'll be able to segregate the funds. We'll be able to make sure we're clearly charging all of the water and sewer to water and sewer and electric to electric and broadband to broadband. But we'll also make sure that we have a buffer. If we did lose one of these big commercial clients, we can use that buffer to say, okay, instead of rates going up 15% right away, there's going to be a 3% adjustment additional each year going forward over the next couple of years. So that's why these items are no longer in what we would call the general government budget. We're looking at them as sort of a separate fund. Now, the one downside to this is because the way we had been budgeting and how we do our formulas, it actually caused the general government budget to take a hit of about $180,000, but we just chose not to make progress in a few areas to come within our 3.5%. It decreased the amount of money that would otherwise be available to the general government budget, but neither here nor there. For those of you who may be newer town meeting members, we're a member of the Mass Water Resources Authority. So we have a centralized waste treatment plant on Deer Island, and we pull our water from the Quabbin Reservoir, and there's a water treatment plant. We're responsible for purchasing the water and sewer service from the MWRA, but we own and maintain all of our local infrastructure, our water lines and our sewer lines. Water and sewer rates will be going up in July by about 2.75%, plus a $2 increase on the meter fee. Now that meter fee often causes a lot of confusion because we call it the AMR meter fee. It's really our fixed cost fee. And unfortunately, it actually gets split into the general fund, so it helps offset the town and the school budget. Perfect accounting, we wouldn't do that, but the year that we pull it out, we've got to find the additional couple $100,000 of revenue to make sure that the town and the schools aren't cutting services. We'll get there. But that $2 increase in the meter fee is going to begin building that fund for the water and sewer. So our hope is that 2 to 3 years from now, we can completely segregate it out, and all those expenses and revenues will hit that one fund. And if the water and sewer fund ever has a really good year, the Board of Selectmen in their capacity as water and sewer commissioners always do have the option of transferring money, it's called retained earnings, back to the general fund. Think of it as sort of an owner's withdrawal, with the owners being the taxpayers. So it's not like we lose that ability, it just increases our financial flexibility, makes sure we know where we're pulling the money from. The opportunity to delay debt service payments for 1 year to mitigate rate impact, we did look at that, and what that means is we could have kicked out our debt payments on water and sewer for a year and had a slightly smaller rate increase. We're concerned about what the rating agencies or our credit rating agencies would have looked at that. So we're not really sure that that was a good idea, and the Board of Selectmen, I believe, voted not to go along with that. I wrote here Invest in infrastructure, and I wish I could tell you that Invest was some new cool infrastructure program, but I actually it's a typo and I forgot the I in there. Water and sewer rates are being kept a little artificially low because our investment in the water and sewer infrastructure isn't as robust as we'd like it to be. We'll be bringing a proposal before town meeting in the fall, and it still needs to go through some internal review as well with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Commission to increase our water and sewer borrowing, to do more lining, to kind of close the gap on our water lining. We want a good water and sewer infrastructure as well. So as I said, infrastructure investment is important, and water segregating the funds is important. Other than that, the only thing that generally changes year to year on the water and sewer budget is the cost from the MWRA, and that's really challenging. We, in theory, should be making money off every gallon we sell, and when we see reductions, that's a good thing, but we're a member of a system. So part of our rate to the MWRA is based on what everyone else in the MWRA, I believe it's over 40 towns, are doing. And unfortunately, Boston is part of the MWRA as well. So I believe the expression that's used is, Boston catches a cold and the rest of the system catches the flu, because a huge change in Boston because they're about a third of the system, can have a substantial impact on everyone else's rates. So we may see some fluctuations here in the next year or two as Boston recovers from COVID and as the economy hopefully begins to open back up. Our numbers here are relatively stable, and they've remained stable over the last few months, but another community could go through a really great water lining or sewer lining project and see their portion of the MWRA shrink. As a result, our portion grows even though we haven't actually grown, and our costs therefore go up. So it's sort of a race to try to make sure we're keeping up on our infrastructure with our neighbors and our other communities in the MWRA system. That being said, those of you who have lived in town for a while, we have great clean water, we have great sewer, and it works really well. So we're lucky that we have a great system, but the budget is otherwise usually very flat, other than that MWRA charge, which is adjusted based on consumption, but also sometimes can go up or down quite a bit based on what the rest of the system is doing. So as we have here the MWRA assessments, we actually don't get that final number until later in the year, so it's always sort of a best guesstimate. You'll notice that increase there is based on what we assume the MWRA rates are going up. There's always about a year back billing period, but again, that's not that we're spending more on water and sewer per se, it's our assessment from the MWRA. The next department there is the airport. Airport salaries. Oh, I think I'm one off here. Yep, I'm off in the airport. That is the salary number for 482 is for water and sewer, sorry. Nope, I lied, that's actually the airport. I'm mixed up on my presentation here. So, airport expenses and capital expenses. You'll notice it appears that the total for the airport goes down. That's not actually a total decrease in the airport budget. That's a change in the costing for the capital expenses for the airport. It's basically, there's no capital project being shown there. One of the things we've done with our system as we've converted our accounting system over and tried to convert our budgeting system over is to be a little bit clearer about how we show capital projects in the budget, so that they don't show an operating budget for a department going up and down and up and down and up and down, and it gives you a challenge to try to see where that department's budget really is, and this is sort of one of those examples. Other than that, the airport is largely flat. It generally runs at a break even. There's a great economic benefit that the town gets from the airport. There's a lot of jobs and taxes that are paid and ancillary jobs. I think the total economic impact is estimated to be around $20 or $30 million to the town. So the airport's generally at around a break even or a slight profit in given years. Next item up on the DPW budget is the Public Works Cemetery Department. Again, you'll show a decrease here. That's largely due to a change in the capital budgeting process and how we show it. So the actual department budget for the cemetery is flat. Most departments were told to submit flat budgets with only necessary or known contractual increases. The cemetery does generate a lot of revenue. Some of that gets segregated into a specific fund for what's known as care or maintenance of lots, and that money basically goes in, and it's designed to, it's a perpetual care fund. Some of that is actually treated as a revenue right to the general fund, so that helps offset the town and the school budgets. It's another area that it would be nice to separate it off and sort of have it be a standalone, but cemeteries are generally not profitable. Ours tends to do better than most. We maintain competitive rates. We started a program a few years ago of also selling the liners, and that's it's a good program. It's made the town a lot of revenue, and now almost all the funeral agencies in the area use that program. So that's been fairly good. But at some point in time, the cemetery will no longer be able to take folks, probably 30 or 40 years down the road. And as people change over to cremations and burial sort of changes, as we have societal changes, the cemetery will always be there. What it'll look like as a business model is anybody's guess down the road. But that question did come up at town meeting a couple years ago. Based on current numbers, the cemetery has about 30 to 40 years of capacity, and then there's some expansions we could do beyond that if we had to. The parks maintenance budget for the DPW, again, here's an area where the budget is up slightly. We do maintain, we moved some utilities that the that the rec department had been paying, if you will, into the parks department, into the DPW budget, because the DPW really maintains the fields. So that's not really a net increase, that's just a move. Again, the DPW is actually the one that conducts most of the field maintenance. They work with the rec department, who focuses more on some of the equipment. Just a quick overview of the DPW department. We didn't get this fully integrated. Engineering maintains tax maps, cemetery records, and the GIS. And they do a lot of our own internal engineering. Public Works, we plow 434 streets, 110 miles of road, 31 miles of sidewalk. The Highway Division maintains, as we had said, 43 streets and 142 miles of sidewalks. Trash and recycling, 6,000 tons of trash a year, 2,500 tons of recycling a year. Our sewer division, 122 miles of sanitary sewers, 2,200 sewer manholes, 3 pump stations, 121 service sewers, unclogged 121 sewer services this year. And let's go forward. 41 acres of cemeteries. All right, Health and Human Services budget overview. And again, these overarching categories are really what the state gives us. So Health and Human Services consists of the Board of Health, the Council on Aging, and Veteran Services. Really no main changes there. The Council on Aging, there's some slight changes due to some costs that we used to be able to cost to the grant that the Council on Aging receives from the state that we now have to bear in the general fund budget. And that's, of course, the Senior Center does an incredible job taking care of our seniors every year, so we have no problem doing that. We are looking at, in this fall, adding a sedan to the Senior Center's transportation fleet. They run really just one bus, but the sedan will help with medical appointments for seniors. Anyone who maybe takes care of a senior or a senior who's looking to stay in their home, they know that the medical appointments are a critical way we can keep seniors in their home. It's a big demand from the seniors in the community. And because of our service territory, folks can get rides from different areas, but we operate a transfer program. We operate something with the MWRA, with the MBTA, but we actually can't get people to a medical appointment in Walpole or Foxborough without a lot of complexity and having to switch out taxis and switch out rides. So we're moving some money around to purchase a sedan in the fall, and that will be specifically for medical appointments, which allows the van to really be for the events, the activities, the shopping. It's a little bit easier to do the medical runs or appointment runs with the sedan, and it helps taking care, it helps with keeping seniors in their home, which is what they want to do and what we want to do. I'll go through the, and then the rec department here, you'll notice the library, recreation, and our celebrations budget, all largely unchanged. The recreation budget we'll get to in just a second. We did have a small change there. So our Health and Human Services budget overall, this is the Board of Health. Again, that's not the Board of Health. That's just a small typo I have in there. My apologies for that. We're lucky that we're going to be able to use CARES Act funding over the next couple of years to add some public health nursing staffing, which was absolutely critical. We were down a nurse for most of this pandemic, and Stacy Lane, our assistant director, who's also a nurse, It was a public health nurse, filled in, and of course the whole health department, Segal and her whole team have done phenomenal. Where this is an area we do need to increase investment in public health. I think this pandemic has shown us that. Norwood was unique in a lot of communities where we actually put public health in the front seat, as we say, in sort of driving our response. Many communities did not do that. There's actually a number of public health officials throughout the country who are quitting their jobs and leaving because they don't really have the support of the rest of the community. And we, of course, don't have that here. We support our health department. They will need some increased resources over time. But for now, we're able to bridge that gap by using some CARES Act funding. So we're particularly happy with that. No major changes into the health budget. The only one being the cost of our hazardous waste program has gone up, and we feel that that's a valuable program we'd like to continue to offer to the community. Veteran services, no major changes here other than this does tend to fluctuate. And I'll explain a little bit about what veteran services does. Massachusetts is one of the only towns in the country, or the only states in the country, that offers veterans assistance, and that's direct aid to veterans at the local level. And it's set up in Chapter 115 of state law. It's a direct program run by the Veterans Service Office. Those direct costs get reimbursed, and they could be paying for groceries, they could be paying for rent. Sometimes it's a direct Social Security payment, if you will, to veterans who are low income, and they have to meet qualifications of being veterans. And of course, it's based on low income veterans. It's not any veteran. We do particularly well with it here. We have a great veterans agent, Teddy Mulvihill. Working with Teddy, we've really defined, and he's really changed what the Veterans Office is, not just in Norwood, but throughout the state. What a lot of communities do is their Veterans Service Officer really just manages the finances of the program or the intake and the applications. We have a great admin assistant in that department, Cindy. She actually handles the application process and the state application process. And Teddy really is a counselor for our veterans, and an advocate for veterans. So it's really almost a first in the Commonwealth model where we've said the Veteran Services Officer needs to be there for veterans, not just taking care of paperwork. He oversees that process, but we have the admin do that. We've pulled everything out of the Veterans Office that's not related to veteran services. What a lot of other communities do is they say, well, sometimes there's a little bit of a gap of time in the Veterans Office, so let's make them do the parking tickets, and let's make them do this, and let's make them do that. We've actually pulled all that out, reassigned it to other departments, and restructured it so that way our Veterans Officer is free to advocate for and counsel and work with veterans, and that's what he does. And honestly, it's life-saving work, and it's critical. So it's a great department. They do well. The direct aid that we provide to veterans is actually reimbursed 75% by the Commonwealth. So that number that you see for Veterans Direct Relief, it tends to go up and down. It's a legal obligation of the town. So if that number is $400,000, we have to pay it. If it drops down to zero for a couple of years, then we don't get a reimbursement because we don't spend it. So we plug a number in there that we lets us balance the budget that we think is average, but it's always subject to what actually happens going on with veteran services. And that number could go way up, it could drop quite a bit. Sometimes people are on a program for a year and a half, and then you see a big drop off. But that number is an obligation. It goes up and down based on what the need is. We pick the best number we think it's going to be. So if you see a drop in that number, it's certainly not a cut in services. It's just realigning it to what we think the average is. And the same thing, if you see an increase, it's just there are more people requiring services, not necessarily that we're doing anything different. Library salaries and the library operating budget. No substantial change here for the library. I do know the library director is on the call. You'll notice that it's relatively flat, as most of our departments have been. Couple of decreases. The library, like most of our departments, like the senior center and like the rec department, have done phenomenal in getting curbside up and running, and we're hoping that the building will be up and running in several weeks. They're phenomenal there, and it's an important social gathering place, and we do want to get it back open once we can do so safely, but they are doing a great curbside program. Other than that, no major changes to the library budget. Library capital expenses here is just there's certain money built in for capital every year in the library budget. You'll also see here the recreation budget. And as we talked about, there's some changes in that full-time salary line. The programming at the recreation department has really exploded over the last couple of years. We've got a great team at the rec department. We're trying to help them sort of manage that and catch up with it and continuing to grow. So we've allocated a part-time benefited position that had been budgeted elsewhere in the budget to the rec department to be sort of an additional program assistant to bring their staff up. They had only had 4 staff plus the custodial staff to maintain the building. This would bring them up to just about 5, and we think it's about time and it's well needed. Most of our rec programs do actually generate surplus revenue that goes into the recs account. They use it to make sure that as we're running courses, that they're able to take care of the buildings, that they're able to replenish the equipment that are used, and we generally run all of our programs actually making money for the town. It doesn't make a huge amount of money, but when you see a cost for a program, those are all designed to recover as much of the cost and sometimes an additional cost as well. One of the other things the recreation department has been doing over the last few years is more and more of our sort of celebrations and community events are falling on the recreation department. These historically had always been volunteer opportunities, and volunteers can still get involved, but as the complexity of these events grows over time, more and more recreation departments are being responsible for community events as well, and logistics for community events, as well as their own recreational programming. So we think this is an investment that's going to pay us back handsomely in increased programming. And again, if you look at some of the programs they've done, just not even during COVID, but prior to that, they've done some great programming and they've got some great recognition for as well. So we think that's a really great investment we're able to make in keeping the total head count the same. Again, the rec department's operating budget, we've made some decreases there as we've tried to balance out the facilities numbers and also to make sure we get the town budget balanced. But we feel like the Civic, we're doing good with repairs, but that is an older building. The gym floor we were able to get done this year, looks phenomenal. Quick question on pools. We will be opening Hawes. We probably going to have Father Max ready to go, but we don't think we'll be opening it for a couple of reasons. It's mainly the Board of Health has some real concerns about pools and infectious disease, and Hawes makes that a little bit easier. We also don't know if we'll be able to have the staffing. We also know that the capacity is greatly reduced for pools, so that would reduce the capacity for Father Max very, very low, but we think we may at least water it and see if we can get it up and running and be ready to make a change if we have to. But we also know that camps will be running, again, reduced numbers, but we're looking to follow the state's guidelines and have those up and running for individuals. And we're happy that the rec department's worked with the health department to get that up and running. Our celebrations budget, which is a small budget, this is the town share for a lot of these events. This is unfortunately a budget item that is way, way underfunded, but always comes sort of at the end of the budget, both literally and figuratively. Many of these events are, there's an enormous amount of money that is raised privately as well. The 4th of July, that covers maybe only a third of the cost, and that has not gone up in a long time. We have to increase some of these, the allocation of these items if we want to continue these programs, and I think we certainly do. The 4th of July parade is often having to raise $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to run. So if we can at least take the pressure off some of these, it would be quite helpful to make sure we can continue to have these programs in the community. And the holiday decoration number, we certainly wish that was higher. We often spend more. That's how we have our holiday lights up and other holiday decorations. And we, again, it's an area we could spend an unlimited amount of money in, but it always does come somewhat at the end of the budget. So on to the light department. Newer town meeting members may not know we're one of 43 towns in Massachusetts, 41 that operate our own municipal electric plant. So that means you buy your power from the town of Norwood, and we are also responsible for maintaining all of the infrastructure. We also have a broadband division, Norwood Light and Broadband, the best cable and internet service and prices available in town. And I can say that with a guarantee. The light department budget is a little funny, and it has to do with what we know, what we call purchase of power. So you'll notice a decrease there in the operating expense line. And we project a number for what we call purchase of power, or the power that we actually buy from energy providers. That number fluctuates based on our need. If we don't use it, we don't buy it, and it fluctuates based, of course, on the market price as well. So that number tends to flow up and down and up and down. And I wouldn't say it's not a real number, but if we had a lot of development or increased use in town, we would need to go right up to purchasing more power. So the number always has to be high. If we didn't have that, that number would come down. So there's not always a correlation between that number going up and down and rates. That number, I think, a year or two ago went up several $1 million, and we didn't necessitate a rate increase because it's just about the amount of power we're purchasing and reselling. And the light department does return millions of dollars a year to the general fund, so it does end up as a significant revenue source to the town. We'll have rate information to the Board of Selectmen in their capacity as light commissioners sometime in July. We are actually not anticipating a general rate increase. There may be an increase of the fixed meter charge, similar to the what we're doing with water and sewer. which will help. It'll be very helpful to building sort of a cash on hand fund. Our accountants have been requesting this for quite a while. It'll let us allow the light department to operate sort of on its own, make sure there's none of that cross subsidization. It'll help us move towards a AAA credit rating, which is important, something that the town wants to do. And it'll help us also make sure that anything that we're doing between light department funds and town department funds is just nice and clean and clear. In a couple of years, we'll pay off a big bond or note that the light department has. That'll let us to put us in a good position towards some rate relief, so some rate reductions or for a period of time depressing the rates, fixing our rate shock fund, which is money we have to put aside so that there's no shock to the electric rates. Also utilizing less depreciation for ordinary capital, and we'll talk about that when we get into the budget. So that's a couple of years coming. The light department can put itself in a very good financial position. Our broadband annual growth, which returns hundreds of thousands of dollars to the town annually, continues. Profitability increases and total market share continues to increase. And the broadband build-out bond will be paid off soon, which will be great. That allows to invest in fiber to the home and some other sort of cutting-edge technologies. Again, you can contact Norwood Light and Broadband for the best internet and cable prices and service in town. So on to the light department actual budget. Now, I'm sure everyone's looking at this page and it gives you a headache, and that's okay. It gives me a headache too. Why do we have so many different salary lines and then they only total up to 3 or 4 different budgeted lines? The reason is those FY18 and 19 numbers, and the reason there's so many of them is those are what's known as FERC codes, or the Federal Electric Regulatory Commission. The light department has to break its payroll out and report to the federal government and the Department of Public Utilities exactly how that payroll is spent. And sometimes it's on a frustrating week-by-week basis. So for us, if we pay a lineman $1,000, it's $1,000 salary. But if he spent half of his time working on fixing an overhead line versus an underhead line, we actually have to account for that differently in the reports we submit to the DPU and to FERC. One of the benefits of our accounting system is it's made this easier. It really is a challenge to make sure we're submitting everything the way we need to the light department, to the various agencies that regulate the light department. So you can see there, even again, the overtime, it has to show as a million different overtime lines. We're able to code it differently now, and it's made everyone's lives a lot easier at the light department. I agree with Katie always. The light department, no net increase in staff other than we are bringing on some, I'd call them bridge engineers, not for actual bridges. We anticipate some retirement, so we have to queue up our engineers to, we do have to queue up our engineers to handle potential retirements in the department. What kind of training is it in September? Question, I'm not really sure if I understand the question. If Katie, if you want to go ahead, you can either unmute yourself and just clarify and we'll get you an answer. Unless that was maybe a conversation with somebody else and maybe it wasn't an intentional question. You can let me know if it was, or if you could just clarify what was meant. So as I said, we do anticipate some changes in the light department. One of the things that we do that's a little unique is our leadership or our management team at the light department, the superintendent and the assistant superintendents, they're all electrical engineers, and we're an engineer-led department. That's one of the reasons we're as successful as we are. We're very lean compared to other fire departments. It's not a fire department, it's a light department. We're very lean compared to other light departments, many of whom similar size systems have quite a bit more staff. We try to keep it lean. We focus on service. We want to make some financial changes. When we have some retirements in the next couple of years, we may look at where we can reallocate staff and have some folks specifically working on rate work and rate policy, but we'll get there over time. We try to do that through reallocations as folks retire to keep the head count as flat or low as we can for the light department. Again, the operating expenses here, it is broken into so many different costs for the light department. A lot of that has to do with, again, just categorizing things correctly. The light department is heavily regulated by FERC and by the Department of Public Utilities. So it appears there that there's that big change in the operating budget, but that really is the purchase power of cost for the light department. One item here is depreciation. Light departments in Massachusetts are required, I believe all electric utilities actually are, not just municipal electric utilities, the IOUs or the investor-owned utilities are as well. A certain value of plant or the total value of depreciation on the light department, when you look at it as a physical asset, is required to be transferred aside and available for capital work at the light department. That's it's really a requirement to keep the system running. So we may have a transformer go down, or when lines go down, we need cash available to always be able to fix that, to always be able to have equipment, because the light department, even though we don't think of it as a life-saving department, is really a power is essential to life and it has to keep running. What we'd like to do by building up, as we see that bond pay off in a few years, is build up a cash capital budget. So that way the light department's depreciation can build up. That gives us a few things to do. It can be built up so that when we have a capital project, we can pay cash for it, which saves on borrowing costs. If we had a substation, if we had a major loss of a substation, it was millions and millions of dollars. We need to be able to move quickly to get that repaired or done. So we're looking at 4 or 5 years out, the light department should be in a very good financial position. We should have some either decreasing rates or keeping rates fairly low for several years, and some great investment there. That's okay. I use the side conversation function all the time and make a number of mistakes there. So our broadband department, and full disclosure, of course, as the general manager of the broadband department, I'm always going to speak well of it. I have Norwood Light and Cable. I use the Norwood Internet. It's phenomenal. All the town buildings use it. If you really want to support your town, go out and support Norwood Broadband. Please become a customer of Norwood Broadband. They're out there to help you. We were able to get several dozen school families who did not have internet access up and running with internet access during COVID, and they're always there for us. They're the local guys. Any money that the broadband department generates over its costs gets returned directly to the town. That reduces your taxes. It pays for teachers. It pays for firefighters. It pays for police officers. So please, if you really want to support your town and have the best internet service available at the best price, please contact Norwood Light and Broadband. They'd be more than happy to take care of you. And I get no sales commissions for doing that, other than it's the best thing that this town has going. It was a brilliant idea when they did it about 15 years ago, and it's been incredibly successful. We are bucking trends everywhere with the continued growth in market share and the continued growth in profitability. So if you're out there and you're a town meeting member, I highly encourage you, check out Norwood Broadband. We can guarantee you the best internet service at the best price. And if you're not happy with it, the light department will make you happy. And remember, the CEO of the light department sits right here at Town Hall. So you can always find somebody to talk to. We are the local guys. So that's my pitch for Norwood Broadband. But the broadband budget, again, stable. We're looking at a bond payoff in a couple of years to be able to invest in fiber to the home, and sales continue to go up for broadband. We have not had an internet rate increase in several years. The only cable increases we've had have been costs we've have to pass on from the cable providers. So that's sort of one of the ways we do two things with the net operating we get from broadband. One is it gets returned to the general fund. The other is we work to keep your rates as low as possible, because we know that there's a competitive advantage there to you. So please give Norwood Broadband a check. They have been absolutely essential in the COVID response. It was our broadband division that provided us our initial ability to communicate among town staff and departments. Our citizen call center, which has received hundreds and hundreds of calls and gotten direct aid to a lot of people, was entirely set up by Norwood Broadband. Percentage of residents that are customers, it's about a third. So it varies slightly. I don't have the exact cable numbers, but it's roughly a third of the market, a little bit more. So we're their largest single market, largest piece of market share, but it's about 35%. I do believe Daryl Hanson, our broadband manager, has joined us. He is here. Daryl, if you want to chime in and just talk a little bit about that market share and confirm if my numbers I think are correct.
That is correct, Tony. We're about 35% of the market share in town. As everyone knows, we competed against Comcast and BIOS, which are huge companies. So for us to have more than a third is doing really well. And comparative to other municipalities, we're on top of the game. So.
Thank you, Daryl. So again, I encourage everyone to check out Norwood Light and Broadband for your internet service and your cable service. I did cut the cord. We're okay with cord cutters, but so now we move on to what we call our shared cost budget, and we'll give time for questions at the end as well. So this is sometimes called the shared cost budget. I would actually really deem it a fixed cost budget. These are items that the town has to pay for no matter what. Things like our debt service, the facilities department is truly a shared cost. The debt service is our annual debt service cost. There's our health insurance, our Medicare, liability insurance, the reserve. These are things that we just have to call out or have to pay for. I want to note a couple of things here that are a little different than in prior years. One, you'll notice the 193 facilities. That's the facilities department. That's the sort of startup cost to operate the facilities department for year one. We'll eventually look at that as a fixed cost because, again, things like facility staff, utility costs, they really are fixed costs. We can't really do anything about them. You can look to mitigate them, but buildings are still going to need janitors. We're still going to need to have electricity on and water. We'll eventually be putting those numbers next year or the year after as we evaluate into one budget. That'll allow for a lot of flexibility and it'll allow for a lot of savings. When you look at the dollar amount we spend on facilities, it's actually, I believe, our second or third largest department by number. So this is the new cost, but this is just the start of something that'll be very beneficial for the town. That second highlighted line, state assessments and charges, that is not that we didn't have that cost prior to FY20. The state is just asking us to include that in the budget as a cost. So what that is the state gives us aid, and they also take some of that aid away as a charge or an assessment. An example of that is we actually pay about $650,000 out of our state aid as sort of our community share because we have the MBTA in the community. I know I don't want to give the MBTA any more money either, but it's a requirement of state law. So we used to just not count that as a revenue, but the state has said, no, book the full revenue, but also book the full cost. So it's just really an accounting change at the direction of the Commonwealth. Two other items I want to point out. That regional schools, that's the cost of Blue Hills. It's also Norfolk Aggie. Norfolk Aggie is only about $27,000. Blue Hills recently did go under a renovation, and that number can fluctuate based on our number of students in Blue Hills, and we did have a small increase as well as other cities and towns and their students in Blue Hills. What the challenge there is that I want everyone to keep an eye on is in FY19, it was just over $1 million, just about 1.1 million. It's now 1.6 million. Nowhere else would we look at a 50% budget increase over a few years and consider that to be acceptable. Now, again, there's some debt service built in there. Our student numbers have gone up, but it's a conversation we need to continue to have about making sure we're monitoring that. Students have a right to go to whatever school they want. So even if we did leave the district, those costs may not change. But it's something that we're going to really have a conversation about. A 50% increase over a couple of years is challenging. We know that Norwood Public Schools would not be, we would certainly not look at that for our school district. Great question. Does that include the charter school in Foxborough as well? No. So the way charter schools show on our books is we get both a revenue and a deduction from our aid, and we're always sort of underwater on that. So that cost is just Blue Hills and just the Norfolk Aggie. Charter schools, when we look at our state aid, there's two sides to it. There's money we get for charter schools, which is just a little bit of money, but then there's the money that comes out of our aid that goes to charter schools. I don't have those numbers with me, but I can pull the aid up and I'll make a note to get those, because that's always a good point to know the impact of charter schools. And that's important because we often look at what are we spending on education in terms of just the school department, but there's a lot more that we're spending on education. A lot of it's really hidden costs, and it's quite, in a lot of cases, it's inequitable, where you got to add on, you take the school budget, we'll add on that $1.6 million for Blue Hills, and in Norfolk Aggie is a very small amount at about $27,000. But there's that $1.6 million, and then on top of that $1.6 million, they get state aid for that for the school department as well. So that's a great question. Let me make a quick note on that. We'll get that out to everyone, charter numbers. And then the reserve fund, there's just a small change there as we increase the reserve fund consistent with our financial policies. You'll notice at the beginning of the budget book, we have our comprehensive financial policies, and we're actually at really around a 90% compliance rate. So we've been making progress on a lot of those, which is a good financial decision to make. And assuming we don't make changes for COVID, which we may have to, that last highlighted line there is our transfers to permanent funds, which is $1.1 million. That would last year we transferred 1.6 between override stabilization and our regular stabilization fund. So the facilities department here, you'll notice there's the cost of the full-time salaries, the increase of the director. Some of these positions that will work jointly are still in the school budget. There was a decision to keep what's in the school budget in the budget, only budget what's new, if you will, as we slowly build this out, and then we'll look at where we are year by year. Most towns, that actually a majority of towns, have converted to shared facilities departments, and they've done it successfully. They move the people first, and then they deal with the budget a year or two later, as that becomes a little bit complicated in how you move the money around. So we're going to have a great facilities department starting in July. It's going to save us a fortune. I feel like I'm still selling broadhand here, but we cannot wait. The team that's in place cannot wait. Paul Riccardi, who will be our shared facilities director, has already been touring town buildings, and we've been meeting weekly with him and Chris and Maureen, his team. It's really going to be something that's long overdue, that is going to save us money. We're already talking about ways that we can assign groundskeepers to the department and then have the DPW take over those grounds. So we're going to hit the ground running in July. And I'm willing to guarantee everyone that next year we're going to ask ourselves how we ever didn't operate like this. And because the goal is to drive more resources to the $500 million of plant assets that we own, We're trying to make sure we're funding the department every year with additional resources. We will see savings, but we want to invest more in our buildings as we go forward. So we're looking forward to this. It is long overdue. When Norwood first looked at this, some towns had done it and it was a little bit new, and then we didn't do it. And then the last time it was looked at, it was sort of the norm and towns are doing it. We still didn't do it. Now we're behind the times by not having done it. So we're finally catching up, but I can guarantee you we're going to not just catch up, we will hit the ground running. Great question about how many salaries are covered by the full-time salary line. So it's a little complicated because there's some salaries still booked in the salary budget. There's an assistant director and an electrician, and the admin support staff are covered under that full-time salary line. Plumber, electrician, and admin. So we're still within our total numbers under the override pledge, but the electrician is in there. The plumber is in there, and the admin and the assistant director. We have some admin support staff coming in. We haven't worked that out yet, but it is, as Ed, as you said, it's finally time we do that. We're going to slowly add to this department over time as we see what's needed. We will have a good crew of craftsmen starting out. Now we may look at adding an HVAC technician down the road. We have a part-time energy manager already through some grant funding. But every year we're going to look at it and evaluate it. Maybe we have a project manager. Maybe we have an additional plumber, an additional electrician. We're really letting our professionals in the facilities department work with us, Paul Riccardi, and say, all right, what do we need to make it work? And what we're looking at is boots on the ground. And I don't always love that phrase, but we're not looking to add a whole lot of administration. We want the electricians and the plumbers and the carpenters and the craftsmen. That's what's going to make the difference in our budget, and that's where we're going to save money. The kitchen at the fire department is an example of where we were looking at perhaps a $500,000 project that we think we can cut in half, because we can do a majority of that work in-house and they'll work collaboratively as a team. The additional oversight is going to be helpful as well. And when we put in some admin support in there sometime in the fall, we're going to have a professional analyst there to work with that budget and work with the presentation of it as well. So we're looking forward to this like nothing else. It's going to be one of the best changes, one of the best things we've done going forward. And once they have the full access to the entire facilities budget, once we combine all the budgets together, as we see that things are working out, they're going to have a lot of flexibility. So it's no longer, uh-oh, what do we do with this? It's, we've got a problem, we can solve it. Perfect example, I'm sitting here in my office at Town Hall and the air conditioning's not working. This building is probably beyond the help of anyone except a major renovation, but we'll be able to share resources better and take on some of these projects a lot better than we have been doing, and also make sure we're driving our resources in the places where we want them to be. So I can't tell you, out of everything in this budget, this is the best thing that the town has done in probably 10 years or more. The debt service budget, which is next, is just our annual cost for debt service. One of the reasons we also want to make sure we're pulling out the water and sewer and electric is that utility funds are generally very heavily leveraged, and those numbers kind of screw with our debt service projections and trying to figure out where we are and what the impact on the budget is and what we can afford and what's within the levy and what needs to be without the levy. So moving that forward is going to be quite the benefit for the town. As we talked earlier about the assessments here, so this is actually a great example to the question earlier of the charter school. This assessment here, so this I'm using my mouse on the wrong item. State assessment charter school, that number right there, that $1.1 million, that's roughly what we're paying for charter schools in Norwood, or what is assessed against us. We do get a revenue. I don't have the revenue number for what's assessed against us, but that's also a cost of education that we are bearing there. These other ones, again, are just items that the state charges us for. We're part of a mosquito control district. There's some air pollution that we do, the registry surcharge, our cost of the MBTA. We pay to be a member of the MAPC, which is the Area Planning Council. These are all things that are mandated in state law. This $231,000 number here is what we pay for county tax. Oh, I do have the numbers down here. Blue Hills, 1.6 million, and Norfolk Aggie, $30,000. The reserve fund, just to break out there, and then our contributions to stabilization funds. So a couple of final thoughts on the budget before we move to the full Q&A if anyone has questions. FY21 will be stable. Revenue losses can be absorbed and dealt with the plan that the FinCom has come up with and endorsed. FY22 is going to be very hard to predict. We don't know the exact state of the economy, the condition of the Commonwealth finances. we're seeing unemployment numbers are shooting up and then dropping down, and retail numbers are shooting up and dropping down. Anyone who's been out in the last week, our outdoor dining seems to be working very well, so that's a sign of some robustness there. Building permits are continuing. We just don't know. We can definitely bridge for FY21, and then we can make what adjustments will be needed for FY22. It's going to depend on where the country is going and where the state's going. But in hindsight, the override we passed last year saved the town in more ways than one, and let us move into this stable. I can tell you a lot of my colleagues are facing, other communities are facing much greater challenges. So Norwood timed that right and came in right at the last minute, and it has saved us from some really brutal service losses. The worst case scenario we predicted last year would have been even worse going into this if we had to cut further. So it ended up being quite the foresight to do that. Key investments continue and expand during the FY21 budget. We're allocating a lot more money for out of district placements, which is important. The Student Opportunities Act money, hopefully that goes through as additional investment in the school department. We'll finally have a facilities department. We're not the last town to do it, but we seem to be one of the last towns in our size category to do it. So those investments continue, and overall the budget is stable, even though we do have a little bit of a cloud of COVID hanging over us. And Daryl Hanson just got back and said, when you take the number of homes that our plant passes, we're actually closer to 40%. There are a couple of larger apartment complexes that we're not able to get access to. They have some exclusivity agreements. So good work, Norwood Broadband. That's the end of the slideshow. I would open it up to questions now. If we get a slew of them, I'll take them one at a time. I know everyone may want to take a breather. I certainly seem to be able to continue to talk without breathing, so I know I've been faulted for that before. I do talk a little too quickly, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about the budget that town meeting members have, or anyone that's on with us. We still do have a number of our department heads here with us. I will stop sharing my screen, and they'd be happy to answer any questions folks have. You can start in the chat box if you have questions, and we can go from there. And what I can do while folks think of their questions or get them typed, I know we'll end up having a slew at once. Sigal, our health director, if you don't mind if I put you on the spot just for a moment, do you want to just give us, everyone that's here, a quick update on our COVID numbers?
Yeah, sure. Our COVID numbers are looking good, just like we're seeing across the state. Clearly a decline in our weekly counts, which is sort of the main measure we use. We do still have a lot of active cases in isolation and quarantine, and we're still doing a lot of contact tracing. But I think last week we had one new confirmed positive case, and this week we have had none so far. So that is a huge change when we think about at the beginning of April, we had 2 weeks of 100 new cases each week. So drastic difference. So fingers crossed for as we move through phase 2, that things continue in this direction. I think everything's looking positive, the trends.
Great, thank you, Sigal. We got a great question from Megan. Any concerns about the school budget with potential changes due to COVID? So the short answer is yes and no. The biggest risk is if the state were to reduce the aid that we projected the budget based on. However, the FinCom has come up with a plan that in the fall, we would make adjustments to cover those losses. So for FY21, the budget that the school committee has approved, that the superintendent and his team put together, we can fund that budget. The Student Opportunities Act money is a little bit more complicated. That was supposed to be additional money for additional programming. So if the state decides not to do that, then we wouldn't do those additional programmings. Going into FY21, we can definitely fund the school budget as presented, and I think that's important. We didn't go through all of this, and we didn't come this far only to come this far. We didn't raise everyone's taxes 10% to then just go have to cut services. Now, FY22 could be a challenge, but we would look at what we could do in FY22 again to keep the services the same, but we're not going backwards. So the budget as the school committee is presented, we have the funding to be able to cover that budget, even if the state does do something dastardly and cut state aid, which we hope that they don't do. And if they do, you should not vote for your state legislator if they voted for a budget that did that, because they have continued to lower the state income tax while raising your property taxes. They're going to try to pass the cost of COVID onto cities and towns, and that's going to get passed onto your property taxes. And they're going to be cutting the same teachers who have had to learn to adapt to distance and remote learning with about 10 minutes notice. The same cops and firefighters and health staff that have been responding to COVID are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of it. So my recommendation is you certainly contact our local delegation, contact the leadership in the House and the Senate, friends in other communities, and the message should be clear. No cuts to what they give to cities or towns or they won't get voted for. They're going to look to dump the entire cost or as much as they can on cities and towns, because that's what they've done. They are not even willing to discuss raising taxes or raising fees or cutting their own budget. So any cuts to cities and towns, I think, is inappropriate for the state, and any state legislator who votes for a budget that reduces services beyond what they'd already promised to cities and towns, you should never vote for them again. But that's just my opinion. But going into FY21, the school budget as is going to go forward. It's one of the biggest investments we've made. If you exclude the override, it's one of the biggest years we've made for an investment in the school department. And I say that by we're finally looking to get ahead on some of the programs and covering some of these costs and creating additional financing mechanisms for the school to cover some of our substantial out-of-district costs. So that's what we have to do, is to increase the programming to address those. Can you clearly go over the next Q&A session dates and times, including the school department Q&A? Sure. So this presentation will be available on probably by tomorrow morning on NCM, and it'll get replayed, and it'll be available on the website and social media. There are two other presentations out there that I recommend everyone watch. They're the FinCom's presentation and the school committee's presentation that they normally give at town meetings. So those are sort of a broader overview of the financial picture and of the school department picture. I encourage you to watch those. We'll be sending, we have those links on our website. This will be recorded and presented or put out there as well. On Thursday at 5 o'clock, I do a 4 o'clock sort of COVID and other thing related update at 4 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, we will be doing a special Q&A. So I won't really have much of a budget presentation, or I'll give sort of just a 5-minute overview and give people a chance to just discuss anything or ask any questions they have. That may not last very long depending on the number of questions. Dr. Thompson will be doing a school department specific Q&A 1 o'clock on Friday. That also, I believe, will be recorded and replayed. And we're waiting on the final login information. We may have gotten it today, and we'll be able to have that out. And the reason we do it that way is a lot of folks have very specific questions about the school department and some of their specific questions about a classroom or a school-by-school program that I'm not the best person to be able to answer those. Dr. Thompson is. And then I'll also be doing a Saturday morning Q&A session just to give people another chance if they just want to have a face-to-face chance to ask a couple of questions. Or as many questions as they really have. We're just trying to pick as much time as many times as we can. We know that it's a little bit of a rushed process, but it's been kind of a crazy year. So as a result of it being a little bit of a crazy year, we would have liked to have been where we are today, maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe a week ago. So it's sort of a race to finish to get through town meeting and hopefully get through it quickly and safely, and then prepare for a longer town meeting in the fall. But all of that information is on our website. Those of you who are town meeting members, you'll hear this again Monday, and you'll be getting a letter from, I believe, the moderator or the town clerk. We really do need you to fill out the information forms you're going to get with your phone number and your email address. One of the only ways we can actually contact town meeting members is by mail. And as you know, that takes several days, and it takes a lot of time. We have very few phone numbers for town meeting members. We have a few email addresses for town meeting members. So if you find that form or you get it, please send it in. It'll be available at, I believe it will be mailing one to everyone. That just helps us get more information out to town meeting members quicker. Other questions for the town manager or any of our department heads? Again, we'll have a couple other sessions. You can always email us at managers@norwoodma.gov. I will actually put that in here, managers@norwoodma.gov. You can always email us. That goes to the manager's office, and we'll get you answers on anything. All right, if there are no further questions, and I'll stick around for a few. Wait, we got one. Looked like the video from the town moderator had outdoor seating as an option for town meeting. Is that correct? I believe the moderator did change his mind, and Monday wants to include some options for outdoor seating. It's going to be with a mic. There may be a deputy moderator. There will be no screen. Most town departments had advised about trying to keep folks in one place to make it easier. But I believe, according to the moderator, that will be available for town meeting Monday night. And there we just posted the school committee superintendent will be hosting a Q&A on the school budget, and we have the link right in there with the meeting ID and the password. So we did get the information there. Other questions? You always tend to come in after I think we're done. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, NCM, for recording this and broadcasting this. We will replay this. And again, any questions you have, feel free to just email us at managers@norwoodma.gov, and we will get you the answer. We'll have 2 more Q&A sessions. They won't be the full presentation, Thursday at 5 o'clock and Saturday at 10 a.m. And of course, you can always email us, and the superintendent will be doing a school budget specific one Friday at 1 p.m. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to all the town staff who joined us this evening. And NCM, do you need me to keep this open for a few minutes to pause the recording and take care of the TV aspect of it? I won't close anything until you guys tell me I need.